In 1982, Seiji Katagiri, who was flying a plane from Fukuoka to Tokyo carrying 174 passengers and crew, made the decision to crash the plane. Despite the co-pilot and other crew members attempting to intervene, the plane crashed, resulting in the death of 24 individuals and numerous injuries. It's unclear what led Seiji to make this decision and whether there were any warning signs. He somehow managed to crash the plane and escape. The families and friends of the victims don't have any closure, nor is there any real understanding of what led to this tragedy. It is actually pretty frustrating because the more you learn about this case and the pilot, the more you will understand that this disaster could have been prevented pretty damn easily and that it would never have ended in such a dark and inhuman way. This is the story of the deranged pilot of Japan Airlines Flight 350, Seiji Katagiri, who committed mass murder and managed to escape unharmed, posing as a passenger. Seiji was born in Oita Prefecture in 1947 and grew up in an upper-middle-class family with a successful business. He was the youngest of two siblings and had a typical childhood. Seiji was an excellent student and was accepted to Okayama University's Faculty of Science and Mathematics. Though later on, Seiji made the decision to leave university and attend an aviation college to pursue his dream of becoming an airline pilot. He also started a family, getting married and having a daughter. Seiji seemed to have a content life and was described as a friendly man who enjoyed fishing and spending time with his loved ones. He was also not known to engage in any bad habits like drinking, smoking or gambling. However, years prior to the crash of Flight 350, Seiji changed a little. His troubles began in the autumn of 1976. During this period, he began to feel different and noticed a decline in his mental health, becoming less sociable. He also began experiencing hallucinations. Despite being described by friends and colleagues as a cheerful person, Seiji began to withdraw from social interactions and exhibited signs of sadness. Many of his co-workers speculated that he may have been dealing with mental health issues. By 1978, Seiji's behavior had become so increasingly abnormal, causing concern among his family members. He confided in his sister that he believed he was not of Japanese descent, but instead a foreigner. As his mental illness worsened, so did his tendency to experience hallucinations and isolate himself from those around him. During 1980, Seiji frequently called in sick to work, and in November of that year, his poor performance, such as rough braking, deviations from flight paths, and rerouting due to insufficient thrust, resulted in his removal from certain flights. Recognizing that something was not quite right, Seiji sought the assistance of a psychiatrist and received a diagnosis of depression. At the same time, Japan Airlines removed him from his pilot responsibilities and he was put on sick leave. Following 1 year of treatment, Seiji resumed his employment but was assigned as a co-pilot for domestic flights. Despite continuing to experience mental health issues, his doctors cleared him for work, affirming that he was fit to do so. Here's what the medical professionals said. Although Seiji suffers from depression, the symptoms are not present during flights and there's no reason for him to not resume his duties as a pilot. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the first mistake they made. They should have given him more time to get better, and certainly they shouldn't have let him return to work, at least until they were 100% sure that he is fine. Although Seiji was permitted to resume his work by Japanese Airlines, his wife remained concerned about his return. I mean, it makes sense. She truly cared about him. In fact, she told investigators that Seiji had been convinced that Soviet Union was trying to create a rift within Japan and ignite a war. Does this sound like a person who is fit to fly a plane and also can be responsible for the safety of a ton of passengers? I really don't think so. Seiji was the captain in charge of JAL Flight 377, traveling from Tokyo to Fukuoka, and was accompanied by the same crew who were on board during the crash. Throughout the flight, He displayed unusual behavior. When instructed by the control panel to wait on the runway, Seiji ignored their request and instead accelerated the plane, stating, "We have been authorized for takeoff." Thankfully, the co-pilot and flight engineer who were present on the plane were able to prevent Seiji from causing further harm. At a later point during the flight, Seiji attempted to execute a sharp right turn which caused the aircraft to suddenly drop 800 feet at an uncomfortable angle. However, the co-pilot again was able to rectify the situation and steer the plane back on course. After the incident, the co-pilot asked Seiji how he was doing, to which Seiji responded by saying, "I am doing great." While a few passengers expressed their dissatisfaction with the flight, the co-pilot did not tell any of Seiji's erratic behavior to anyone. Perhaps as a co-pilot, he felt the need to uphold the captain's authority and show him respect. So it was the next day. At approximately 7:30 am on February 9, 1982, Japan Airlines Flight 350 departed from Fukuoka and was in the air. As usual, Seiji was the captain pilot. However, it was later discovered that he was not feeling well and had not consumed any food or coffee offered by the flight attendants. Despite this, the flight appeared to be progressing normally. Just after 8 am, the plane began to descend from 29,000 feet to 16,000 feet in an anticipation of landing at Haneda Airport in Tokyo. At 8:35, permission to land was granted and the landing gear and flaps were activated. At around 8:45 am, the co-pilot initiated the landing procedure, but Captain Seiji did not respond. He was too busy hallucinating. Now, what I'm about to tell you sounds unreal. Can you imagine someone who's hallucinating flying a plane? Well, unfortunately, in this case, that was very real. And that sounds terrifying. So here's what's happening with Seiji. He at this point was experiencing delusions of being captured by some enemy, probably Soviet Union, and believed that it was better to die than to be caught. He yelled the word "die" as it kept echoing in his mind. His body was shaking. As the plane approached the runway for landing, he somehow eventually confirmed the decision to land in the midst of his manic episode. However, instead of relying the autopilot, he disengaged it and pushed the control stick forward, causing the plane's nose to lower and putting the throttles on idle. During the landing process, the flight engineer noticed that the engine speed was decreasing and alerted the crew by shouting "power low." In response, Seiji took action and moved the throttles of the second and third engines to the reverse injection position. The co-pilot became aware of an unusual downward tilt in the plane's nose and realized that the captain was pushing the control stick. As the co-pilot attempted to counteract this by pulling back on the control stick, Seiji continued to push it forward. The co-pilot shouted, "Captain, please stop," but Seiji didn't even react. The co-pilot couldn't believe his eyes. Seiji was almost acting like he was possessed by some evil spirit. At this point, not only the co-pilot but also the flight engineer was aware of Seiji's actions and attempted to intervene to prevent any further harm. But Seiji refused to give up control of the plane. Despite the co-pilot and flight engineer's efforts to regain control of the aircraft, Seiji's actions had already caused irreparable damage by the time they were able to stop him. When the plane was only 1,800 feet away from the runway, it suddenly crashed into the Sea of Tokyo Bay next to the runway. As the aircraft descended, it veered to the right, causing the plane to break apart into two sections. One of the wings was forcefully separated and all of the engines were torn from the plane's body. It was a complete and utter nightmare that no one ever could have predicted. Or could they? I mean, when you think about it, they could have prevented all this. Seiji was not in the right headspace to pilot a plane. His behavior the day before the crash was enough for the authorities to not let him fly. That day he completely ignored the control tower and almost crashed. Nevertheless, thanks to the co-pilot, the day was saved, but this time we cannot say the same. After the crash, the flight engineer was found unconscious, while Seiji was seen crying. The crew members in the rear of the aircraft were unable to communicate with those in the cockpit, prompting the co-pilot to direct the passengers to put on their life jackets and initiate the emergency exit procedures. As a standard protocol, all members of the flight crew are responsible for ensuring the safety and orderly evacuations of the passengers before exiting the plane. So, simply to put it, no one in the crew leaves the plane until all the passengers are brought out to safety. Despite this standard evacuation procedure, Seiji was among the first to exit the aircraft and be rescued. When rescue crews arrived at the scene around 9 am, members of the media also arrived and captured footage of the initial groups of survivors, including Seiji, who appeared to be smiling and posing as a passenger. He was subsequently taken to a hospital for treatment of his injuries. At first, investigators suspected that the crash might have been caused by a mechanical malfunction or the age of the aircraft. However, their investigation soon led them to conclude that the crash was actually an intentional act done by Captain Seiji himself. The crash resulted in 24 fatalities, 54 passengers sustaining minor injuries, and 95 passengers having extremely serious injuries. Some of the passengers drowned in the sea, while others died due to head injuries and other injuries caused by the crash. Initially, Japanese airlines attempted to conceal the actual cause of the crash and hid Seiji after finding him and taking him to a private medical facility to treat his minor injuries, presumably to avoid media attention. The disaster investigation team determined that Seiji's piloting skills or sleep time did not contribute to the crash. Instead, they attributed his actions to his mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, and recommended that his pilot license be revoked. Seiji faced charges of negligence causing fatalities and was arrested, but due to his history of mental illness, he was not prosecuted. Instead, he was sent to Tokyo Metropolitan Matsuzawa Hospital for treatment, and JAL dismissed him from his job. Subsequently, his wife filed for a divorce. It is unclear how long he stayed in the hospital, but he was eventually released and now lives in Kanagawa Prefecture, where his sister takes care of him. Japan Airlines faced severe backlash for their initial attempt to conceal the true cause of the crash, as well as for their decision to let Seiji continue flying even after he was diagnosed with a mental illness. The doctors who cleared him to fly also shared in the responsibility for the incident. If Seiji had been consistently receiving treatment and prevented from flying, the crash could have been avoided. Though still there were some positive changes that came about after the crash. The Japanese Aeromedical Research Center was established to enhance the well-being of airplane crew members both physically and mentally. In addition, JAL retired the Flight 350 designation and a memorial was erected at the Haneda Airport Pier to honor the victims of the accident. Although the unimaginable damage was already done, at least from this point onwards, Seiji's story became a lesson to all to ensure that no disaster like this will ever happen. Mental health should not be taken so lightly. What do you guys think about this story? Should the blame go to Seiji, who was mentally ill, or the authorities who didn't take his mental health serious and let him fly? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Alright then, that brings us to the end of this story. Thank you for watching, and with another story I will see you guys soon. Until then, stay safe out there and goodbye.